Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Well, you know, it's pretty much all a con game, and some con games are more well-known than others. Stacy Herbert.
Max Keiser, the short count con. It's a change raising con, it's known as, and is a common short con and involves an offer to change an amount of money with someone while at the same time taking change or bills back and forth to confuse the person as to how much money is actually being changed. The most common form, the short count, seen in many movies.
Yes, that movie from 20 years ago or so, Paper Moon, had a famous scene during the Depression when they were at the store and they're doing the change con. They're switching back and forth, and the person ends up with a lot less money than they thought they did. And we see this being played out on the global banking scandal scale, and as we've been saying all along, it's all based on traditional con games, just played out on much bigger time scale, much bigger size of a con, a bigger con, the biggest con of all. Remember, Paul Newman in The Sting was chasing the big con. This is really the biggest con.
Yes, this is a global scale con. Now, I thought of this short change con when I read this on Yanis Varoufakis' website. For Europe's sake, Greece must renege on its bailout commitments. My op-ed in Le Monde. It's not actually the Greek part, but it's this little thing he's talked about in Spain, and this was in mid-May. And he said the fiscally stressed Spanish government was injecting large amounts of capital into Spanish banks. Simultaneously, to help finance the Spanish state, the ECB has provided large loans to Spanish banks at 1% interest rate, which they then relent to their quote-unquote savior, i.e. the Spanish state, at interest rates often exceeding 6%.
Yes. So what we see is a quick change of debt for debt, a quick change, a con game, where the indebtedness actually increases, and the austerity measures are only going to have to be more severe because they're increasing the debt. A lot of people think that the programs in place in Europe are meant to create some kind of inflation to get some economic growth, but they're actually designed to create more deflation, more debt, more austerity, because the goal is asset stripping and neo-feudalization.
Well, it's a con. It's to take your assets and wealth. And that's the simple, it's very simple. Somebody's making money in this equation, and it's not the people.
No, it's the folks who are organizing the con game. They're, of course, making out like bandits during this process. And they every time they introduce a new fund, whether it's the Exchange Rate Stabilization Fund or the Emergency Fund A or the Emergency Fund B, these are all meant to just create more legs of the con game, to create more fees for the con artists, and to bankrupt the poor suckers like the Europeans who are getting conned by this unmerciful confiscation of wealth.
So short change game. Remember, a lot of money has to keep on changing back and forth. You have to say, here's 10, and you give me 9 back, and I give you 10, and blah, 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 and they keep on changing money. So you get very confused over how much you actually owe and who owes who what and whose money is that and that. So solidarity, Euro style, Finnish loans, ECB bond purchases, EFSF, tough love, and assorted horror stories from the postmodern Euro workhouse. So this is about Greece. Now I want to show you another more short change con operation. Yanis Varoufakis is writing about the bankrupt Greek state was recently forced by the Troika, remember the ECB, IMF, and EU, to borrow 4.2 billion euros from the EFSF so as immediately to pass it on to the European Central Bank so as to redeem Greek government bonds that the ECB had previously purchased in a failed attempt to shore up their price. This new loan boosted Greece's debt substantially, but netted the ECB a profit of around 840 million euros, courtesy of the 20% discount at which ECB had purchased these bonds.
Right, and that profit is not used to offset the austerity measures. It goes into the pockets of the administrators and the technocrats for organizing this con game.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the $10 in Paper Moon that Ryan O'Neal and his daughter Tatum walk away with. They come out, they've stolen the money from the gas station. They walk away with the $10, and the woman is left there confused. The same here, as the Greek people are just confused. They don't know what's going on, but all they know is that they're 840 million euros shorter.
Right. And they know, the con artists, like the European technocrats, know that the victims of the con, the Europeans, whether it's the Greeks or the Spanish or the Irish, the instinct, they're too polite to question the con artists because they're smooth talking, they wear suits, they have nice hats. They come in there and they talk a good game, and they thought, well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're the ones that need to re-examine our position. And they're very polite, and the con artists walk out the door with their money.
Well, they're confused as it's going on. Later, when the lady in Paper Moon counts her money, she's going to find out for sure that she was $10 short. Now, we find this over and over in Europe. Well, we suddenly found a black hole of debt. We don't know where this came from. There's suddenly, in this case, there's going to be 840 million euros short in the Greek state. And they're going to say, we don't know how this came about. It's short. How did this happen? And people are going to blame the government, but nobody knows that it was actually the ECB and the bankers behind it that defrauded you.
Right, and we've seen this before too. In the UK, for example, Royal Bank of Scotland will suddenly announce, oh, we have £1 trillion, black hole of debt. We have no idea where it came from. Oh, we need to be nationalized. The executives get to keep the money they stole, and austerity measures need to be imposed. Oh, this bank has Alpha Bank in Greece. It's a huge black hole of debt. We don't know where it came from. Bankia, where's that debt? We don't know where it came from. Or MF Global and JP Morgan. Remember, JP Morgan stole 1.2 billion from customers. They stole it from the customers, and they pretended as if, and Jamie Dimon is saying, we don't know where it went. It's a black hole of debt. And he's sailing off into the sunset, drinking himself silly from all the excesses of his ill-gotten gains and con games.
Corzine too, yeah.
Corzine also still funding Obama. We don't know where the money came from. We opened the front door, and this $1 billion came pouring in through the front door, and Ed McMahon wasn't even there.
So remember, the important ingredient to this con is confusion. You must do it very fast, and you must confuse that person. Spain bailout terms to be agreed within a week. Urgency reflects growing consensus that Spanish collapse might start chain reaction that could topple Italy and destroy the euro. Spain has come under pressure from the European Central Bank, Germany, and Netherlands to move before Greek elections on 17 June, amid fears that political chaos in Greece and the weakness of Spanish banks could threaten the euro's financial stability. There is a need to ensure that the euro area is properly ring-fenced and protected from possible Greek fallout, and that means strengthening Spain's banks, said an official.
Step right up, get your pockets picked by too big to fail banks. Don't waste your time. Get in line, ladies and gentlemen. Well, yeah, and it's amazing that the same con can work over and over and over again. That's what P.T. Barnum said. There's a sucker born every minute. You can do the same con 5 minutes later. Or look at the IPO of Facebook. The same pump and dump con from again and again and again.
Well, you say this con works over and over. Well, here's from December 24th, 2011. Short change con makes stop in Worthington. So this is in Worthington, Minnesota, right before Christmas. Some guy pulled into a station, a shop, defrauded this woman of $50 by using this short change thing. He confused the woman at the cash register, and she ended up $50 short. The police say, now keep this in mind when you're thinking of any news coming out of Europe, all the chaos, panic. The best way to avoid a short change con is to slow down, says Chris Hilsheim, the police officer involved in this situation in Minnesota. If you have somebody trying to rush a transaction, stop and focus on one transaction at a time. They tried to rush it along and get multiple exchanges going at once, and that's where the confusion comes in.
Perfect. You've got these various funds in Europe. They're all using the same con of multiple transactions simultaneously to confuse folks. They end up with all the money, and the people end up with the austerity measures. But you've got banks on Wall Street like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. They have created funds where they invest in the con games in Europe. And they call it, it's not officially called the Con Game Arbitrage Fund, but it might as well be called the Short Change Con Game Arbitrage Fund by Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. So their investors, their clients, can invest in the bank's ability to commit fraud in Europe and around the world.
But that's also a lot of the whole banking model is this short change con, this whole confusion and funds on top of funds. Here's those 5 mortgages there. We're going to package them up and bundle them up and roll them up into one, and it's going to be better. It's going to be AAA. You know, so this is what the model is.
Well, remember the credit default swap scam in places like that fishing village in Norway or Montgomery, Alabama, where the bankers from Wall Street come in and they say, we're going to swap your current debt with this collateralized debt swap or obligation network bond, and you're going to lower your interest rates for about a minute. But the second I walk out the door, they're going to spike to triple what they were, and you owe us $300 billion.
Okay, and now Greece in particular has several layers of debt to all sorts of people, the Troika, the EFSF, but here's a new one, the European Redemption Pact. A golden idea to save or doom the euro. Germany's new idea is coyly named the European Redemption Pact. Countries with debts greater than 60% of gross domestic product, the ignored limit under the European Union's Maastricht Treaty, would transfer those debts into a redemption fund, which could be covered by joint bonds. The scheme has been called Eurobonds Light. Here's the catch, Max. Countries using the scheme would have to cover 20% of their debt with collateral, payable in gold or currency reserves.
Aha!
Default on the payments and you lose your gold.
Told you, told you, told you so. Of course it's gold. Germany wants the gold. This is a great way for Germany to get all the gold. This is so predictable. We've been saying this for over a year now. The end game is gold, and this is clearly, obviously, Germany's making their play.
And well, they say Germany, the supervisor of the pact and presumed inheritor of the gold if the loans are not repaid, seems to be saying, we don't trust the euro as it is. It's too weak, so give us a stronger gold-backed euro. They should have had a gold-backed euro from the beginning. It would have been a true currency union. Here, this has been a short change con. So Germany and whoever the powers that be behind the ECB have used a short change con, and now they know Greece is down, Portugal is down, Spain is down, Italy, which has 2,500 tons of gold, is next, and this redemption bond is going to be something for them.
Well, one country out there should jump the gun and offer a gold-backed currency ahead of all the shenanigans and take the wind out of Germany's sail and have the best performing currency in the world.
Or a silver-backed currency.
Like Mexico or Athens, as we tried to do with Hugo Salinas Price when we were just in Athens, pushing this silver-backed currency as a way to jump the gun on Germany and have the best performing currency ahead of Germany. Hopefully the Greeks will wake up to this reality.
Exactly. Be prepared for the short change con.
Absolutely. Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming away. Stay right there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Seattle and talk with economist Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
It's very good to be back, Max.
All right, Yanis, here we are again. Now, Spain is in line for a Greek-sized bailout, some kind of bailout that we've seen in Greece already. You liken the European aid to Greece, Spain, and the others as being a Dickensian workhouse. Explain.
Look, what was a workhouse? The workhouse was an institution under Victorian conditions, the purpose of which was to deter the poor from seeking the assistance of the rest of society. Now, similarly, the EFSF, the European Financial Stability Fund, the facility, the purpose of which is supposedly to come to the assistance of member states of the Eurozone that effectively find it impossible to refinance themselves, like Spain now, the conditions that are imposed by the EFSF, by the ECB, by the Europeans in general, on member states that need the assistance of the FSF are Dickensian workhouse conditions. In other words, the reason why Spain has been so reluctant over the last few weeks to seek the assistance of the FSF was that life would become nasty, brutish, and short within the FSF. But you see, the whole thing has collapsed because the reason for creating workhouse conditions for the FSF, for countries like pipsqueak countries like Greece and Ireland, was to deter countries like Spain from seeking the assistance of the FSF. But the whole business of bailouts has been so toxic in Europe that now Spain, that was supposed to be deterred by the Dickensian conditions in the poorhouse and the workhouse of the FSF, is now in it anyway. So what next for Europe, except for a complete and utter disintegration?
Yes. Well, you know, Spain was making a comment to the effect of they want the money, they want the EU money, but they don't want strings attached. So to me, it's less of a workhouse and more like a whorehouse. You know, the first day in the whorehouse, the whore says, "Oh, I'll sleep with the customer, but I won't do X and I won't do Y and I won't do this or that." And then a week later, they're doing everything that the Johns want them to do because that's their job as a whore. Now, whether it's Greece, whether it's Spain, whether it's Ireland, they've been put into the position of being debt whores to the Troika, the ECB, the IMF, and these other whorehouse managers. They'll make a few bucks, I suppose, but they lose their sovereignty, they lose their integrity, they lose their moral compass, and they are in a bad way. What's wrong with that analogy?
A whorehouse is potentially profitable. The EFSF and all of these institutions that we've created for saving Europe, the Eurozone in the last year and a half, are impossible to sustain. So our whorehouse, to use your cruel and vulgar analogy, is effectively breaking down. It's going bankrupt. But look, Max, think of what was happening before Spain appealed to the FSF. We had the madness of the following kind of relationship between banks, the Spanish government, and Europe. These bankrupt Spanish banks were being bailed out. They've been bailed out. You know, they've been receiving Spanish money now for a very long time. Now, the Spanish state, of course, was bankrupt. So what was the solution that the good of Europe, Mr. Draghi in particular, came up with? The LTRO. So the banks that were being bailed out by the Spanish state were borrowing from the ECB at 1% to lend to the Spanish government that was bailing them out at 6%. Now, this Ponzi austerity, and it is a Ponzi austerity because all the conditions for having this and for having the LTRO were that the Spanish government was screwing effectively the Spanish economy into the ground through austerity that is being imposed now for a year and a half. And that's why Spain is bankrupt and has to be bailed out like Ireland, Portugal, and Greece. The only problem is that the bailout fund is not enough to bail out Spain, and the whole thing is coming down in flames.
Yanis, I think you may have come up with a fantastic term there, the Ponzi austerity, because in a traditional Ponzi scheme, new money is coming in to pay off the original members of the pyramid scheme. But in this European reverse Ponzi scheme or a Ponzi austerity scheme, it's not new money that's coming in, but new debt at ever higher interest rates. So it's a downward spiral of debt, a Ponzi debt scheme in reverse that's guaranteeing, without a question of a doubt, what you say is the workhouse, I call the whorehouse, but it's inevitable through a Ponzi scheme. It's a negative pyramid scheme of ever imploding debt, yes?
Absolutely. Look, it's very simple. Austerity is supposed to be belt tightening, that is reducing the amount of money that you're utilizing in order to keep your system going, whether your system is a household, a firm, or a state. Now, austerity could never work in the Eurozone, given the way that its architecture worked. So we didn't have austerity. We had what I call Ponzi austerity, because on the one hand, you're squeezing, utilizing the ideology of belt tightening and austerity, taxpayers into a kind of state that is completely unsustainable. Effectively, you are killing all economic life within Europe. You're creating a major recession by screwing people right down to the ground, while at the same time you are creating huge quantities of money that is being bandied about between states and banks, but in an unsustainable way. That's why I call it this Ponzi austerity.
Right, so I want to emphasize this. So in the case of Greece, and now in the case of Spain, what the governments are asking the people to do is to accept two things: austerity and more debt. The people in these countries believe that they're accepting austerity in the belief that they will have their debt reduced. Well, this is completely false. As you point out on your blog and in your writings, they are being asked to accept austerity plus more debt. Now, in the case of Spain bailout, Will it be like Greece? I think we've said it will be. So I'm going to move on to this question. On to this 4.2 billion euro loan Greece has recently forced to take from the EFSF. This is a perfect example of your schema of a Ponzi austerity. Who exactly forced Greece to take the loan? Was it in the interim government that accepted the loan? Who profited from the loan? So go into greater detail on the Ponzi austerity, reverse Ponzi scheme as it relates to Greece and the EFSF loan.
You will recall that last November we had a supposed technocrat being installed as prime minister, an unelected prime minister of Greece, Mr. Papadimos, one of the worst central bankers in the world, given that together with Mr. Trichet increased interest rates a month before Lehman Brothers went down in flames. Now, this gentleman, Mr. Papadimos, who happens to be a colleague of mine at the University of Athens, effectively presided over the negotiations that led Greece to signing the second memorandum of understanding, the second bailout with the Troika. As part of that second memorandum that Mr. Papadimos presided over, Greece was committed to a series of three things. Loan installments that it would receive from the Troika, payments that it would make to the Troika from those loans, and thirdly, austerity measures that is screwing the population into the ground. The Greek government has been the interim government, that technocratic supposedly government that was reliant on the parliamentary support of the major parties, corrupt parties in Greece, the socialists and the conservatives, saw through this deal completely. So the Greek government did its part of the deal. Now, let me mention that particular payment that you mentioned too. 2.5 weeks ago, according to that schedule of loans and repayments, Greece was going to receive 5.2 billion euros from the FSF, of which 5.2 billion it would be able to keep 1 billion for the use by the Greek state for buying pharmaceuticals for hospitals and paying for schools and pensions and stuff, 1 out of 5.2, and 4.2 would go back to the European Central Bank, and I'll explain why that was part of the deal. Now, the Troika, interestingly, broke that agreement. So the 1 billion that was going to go to the Greek state never reached the Greek state. So of the 5.2, only 4.2 went to Greece, but not to Greece, because Greece had to pay every single euro of the 4.2 billion to the European Central Bank. Now, why? Why to the ECB? The ECB, in its wisdom, if you recall, a year and a half ago, entered the secondary bond market and bought stressed bonds of Greece, Ireland, and so on, supposedly to prop them up. That failed, of course. Nevertheless, it ended up with billions of worth of Greek government bonds in its books. Now, in March, those bonds, for all other bondholders, were haircut savagely, not the ECB's. So the ECB wanted to take its money back, to have its bonds, Greek government bonds, redeemed. And it had them redeemed at face value, even though the ECB never bought them at face value. They bought them at 20 or 30% discount, which means that the Greek government, and that's how I finalize the whole thing, 2.5 weeks, borrowed 4.2 billion from one arm of the European Union, from the FSF, in order to give it wholesale to the ECB, so that the ECB could profit from the bankruptcy of the Greek state, while the Greek population was being screwed to the ground. That is Ponzi austerity.
Okay, so you have the population being forced to accept austerity, plus more debt at the same time, plus the specter of the people who are perpetrating this Ponzi scheme enriching themselves with billions of dollars by manufacturing and selling and constructing this Ponzi austerity scheme. And there's an election coming up in Greece in a few days. Yanis, the new government, what's the first thing they should do? Day one, whoever gets into office, what should they do?
One thing, announce that Greece is not going to accept the next loan installment from the Troika. Look into the eyes of the German taxpayer and say, you are backstopping these loans to us. Those loans are not helping us restore our economic activity, our society, keep our hospitals running. Those loans we have to take unsustainably and give them back to the ECB or to somebody, some other creditor. Now, we are not going to be able to keep doing this because we are, sort of collapsing and imploding. So your good money is going to be thrown after bad money, and in all consciousness, and on the basis of just simple solidarity of one European to another, we, the Greek taxpayers, the Greek government, are looking at you, the German taxpayers, and saying, we are not going to accept this money. And if this means we're going to go bankrupt, well, so be it, because we are bankrupt. We have to find another way of making this Eurozone of ours work, or let it just go to hell.
All right, Yanis Varoufakis, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Yanis Varoufakis. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.